There's a moment when you realize that being misunderstood isn't your weakness. It's your weapon. When the desperate need to explain yourself dies, something far more dangerous is born. The silence that follows isn't emptiness. It's electricity before lightning strikes. Most people live their entire lives as defendants in a court that never adjourns, constantly pleading their case to judges who were never qualified to hear it. They exhaust themselves, translating their depth into digestible fragments, reducing their complexity to fit the narrow bandwidth of ordinary comprehension. But there comes a point, a single crystalline moment of recognition, when you understand that the lion does not explain its roar to the sheep. This isn't about arrogance. This is about something far more sophisticated. The strategic cultivation of inscrutability as a form of power that transcends conventional dominance. When Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, he understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to grasp: that uncertainty creates a gravitational pull more powerful than any explicit display of force. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when someone's calm refusal to defend themselves made you more unsettled than any argument ever could. When their silence stretched just long enough to make you question not just what they were thinking, but what you were missing. That's not accident. That's architecture. The paradox of true power is that it achieves maximum impact through minimum movement. Like a master chess player who wins not through aggressive attacks but through the subtle positioning that makes every opponent move predictable, the truly formidable presence shapes reality through strategic absence rather than overwhelming presence. Consider this carefully. When someone attacks you publicly, let's say in a meeting where they question your competence in front of colleagues, every instinct screams to defend, to counterattack, to prove them wrong. The ordinary response is immediate and heated: justifications, credentials, evidence. But watch what happens when you instead pause, allow 3 full seconds of silence to expand, then respond with nothing more than interesting perspective, before turning your attention elsewhere. The room doesn't just notice your composure. They become acutely aware of something else: their own discomfort with the space you've created. That silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with possibility. In those 3 seconds, every person present runs through their own interpretation of what your calm might mean. Are you so secure that the attack doesn't warrant a response? Do you know something they don't? Is this a strategic patience that precedes some devastating counter? The beauty is that you never tell them. You let them construct their own prison of uncertainty. This is the essence of what we might call implacable positioning. A state of being that becomes influential precisely because it refuses to explain itself. Like gravity, it doesn't argue for its existence. It simply exerts its force and lets reality bend around it. But here's where this transcends simple stoicism or emotional regulation. This isn't about suppressing reaction. It's about cultivating a kind of presence so centered and complete that external validation becomes not just unnecessary, but almost comically irrelevant. Imagine a mountain being asked to justify its height to the hikers struggling up its slopes. The strategic applications are vast and nuanced. In professional settings, when colleagues attempt to undermine your position through passive aggression, perhaps making subtle comments about your methods during team discussions, the conventional wisdom suggests addressing it head-on. But consider the alternative: responding to their criticism with genuine curiosity. I'd be interested to hear more about that approach. Walk me through your thinking. This isn't deflection. It's redirection. You're not defending your position. You're placing them in the position of having to substantiate theirs, while simultaneously demonstrating a confidence so secure it can afford to examine criticism without feeling threatened by it. The psychological effect is profound. When someone expects defensive pushback and instead encounters open inquiry, they often realize they haven't thought their position through as thoroughly as they believed. More importantly, observers witness your ability to remain unshaken while engaging constructively, a display of strength that no amount of argument could achieve. This extends into digital spaces where the dynamics become even more pronounced. Online, where context is limited and misunderstanding is the norm, most people exhaust themselves in endless clarifications and defensive explanations. They become trapped in cycles of justification that only serve to diminish their authority. But consider the power of strategic digital silence. When someone tags you in a post designed to provoke or embarrass, when they screenshot your content to mock it, when they attempt to rally a crowd against your position, the expected response is engagement. They want you to defend, to clarify, to participate in their theater. But what happens when you simply don't? Not out of cowardice or hurt feelings, but out of a calculated understanding that your energy is too valuable to be consumed by every invitation to chaos. The silence doesn't go unnoticed. Others begin to question why you're not responding. They wonder if you've seen it. They wonder if you're unbothered. They wonder if there's something they're missing. Your absence becomes more present than most people's presence. This is the paradox of refined power. It often achieves more through what it doesn't do than through what it does. In romantic relationships, this principle becomes even more delicate and powerful. When a partner attempts to provoke a reaction through emotional manipulation, perhaps withdrawing affection or making subtle threats about the relationship's future, the typical response is to chase, to reassure, to negotiate. But what happens when you instead remain completely present yet unshaken? When you respond to emotional withholding not with pursuit, but with your own emotional fullness. Let's be specific. They say, "I don't know if this is working anymore. Maybe we need space." The conventional response? Panic, negotiation, promises to change. But consider, I understand you're processing something difficult. I'm here when you're ready to talk about it. Then you continue living your life fully, not in defiance or passive aggression, but from a place of genuine security that doesn't require their reassurance to remain intact. This isn't manipulation. It's the demonstration of a completeness that doesn't depend on their emotional state for its stability. The effect is often profound. They realize they're trying to shake something that cannot be shaken, not because it's rigid, but because it's truly rooted. Machiavelli understood the tune. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. This isn't about dishonesty. It's about understanding that consistency of action often matters more than consistency of explanation. When your behavior demonstrates reliability while your words remain strategically sparse, people learn to trust what you do rather than demand explanations for why you do it. This becomes particularly powerful in group dynamics. Picture a social gathering where the conversation turns to gossip or collective judgment of someone absent. The typical responses are either participation or obvious moral grandstanding about not engaging in gossip. But consider a third option. You simply become unavailable for that particular conversation. Not dramatically, not with announcements, but through a kind of selective presence that participates in connection while remaining absent from destruction. Others notice. They notice that somehow the conversation shifts when you're present, not because you're controlling it, but because your energy doesn't feed certain types of discourse. This is influence through selective engagement, choosing what frequencies you amplify rather than trying to control what others broadcast. But here's where this philosophy moves from strategy to transformation. The goal isn't to manipulate others. It's to cultivate a kind of inner architecture so solid that external chaos cannot collapse it. When someone can remain centered while others lose themselves in reaction, when they can stay curious while others become defensive, when they can maintain their clarity while others surrender to confusion, that's not just tactical, that's alchemical. This kind of presence begins to shape environments simply by existing within them. Like how a single candle can illuminate an entire dark room without effort or announcement, a person operating from this level of inner stability naturally influences the emotional temperature of any space they enter. The practical applications multiply exponentially once you understand the underlying principle. In professional negotiations, when the other party attempts to pressure you through deadlines or emotional manipulation, your ability to remain unrushed and unconvinced becomes your greatest leverage. Not because you're being stubborn, but because you've cultivated the capacity to think clearly under pressure while others are thinking reactively. They might say, "This offer expires at the end of the day. Take it or leave it." The reactive response is to feel pressured into immediate decision. The powerful response: "I appreciate you sharing your timeline. I'll need until tomorrow morning to give this the consideration it deserves." No apology, no explanation of why you need time, just a clear statement of your process delivered with complete calm. What happens next is fascinating. They often reveal that the deadline wasn't as firm as they claimed, or they become uncertain about whether they've misjudged your level of need or interest. Your refusal to be rushed forces them to recalculate their approach. This extends to social media dynamics where the attention economy turns everyone into performers competing for validation. The conventional wisdom suggests that engagement equals influence, that you must constantly produce content, respond to comments, participate in every trending conversation. But consider the alternative: selective, thoughtful engagement that treats your attention as precious rather than abundant. When you only speak when you have something meaningful to contribute, when you resist the urge to insert yourself into every debate. When you allow others to exhaust themselves in performative arguments while you maintain your energy for what truly matters, your occasional contributions carry exponentially more weight. People begin to pay attention when you do engage because they've learned that your words are not cheap. This is the principle of strategic scarcity. Value increases with rarity. When your opinion becomes something that must be earned rather than freely given, it becomes something people actually want to hear. But the deepest level of this philosophy involves a fundamental shift in how you understand your relationship to others' perceptions. Most people live as prisoners of the stories others tell about them, constantly trying to edit those narratives through explanation and justification. But there's a profound liberation in recognizing that those stories exist independently of you and ultimately have very little to do with who you actually are. When someone misunderstands your motives, misrepresents your actions, or spreads false narratives about your character, the conventional response is correction. But what if correction is neither possible nor necessary? What if the truth of who you are is demonstrated through the consistency of your actions over time, rather than the eloquence of your explanations in moments of conflict? This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to truth or abandoning all accountability. It means distinguishing between situations where clarification serves a genuine purpose and situations where it merely feeds your ego as need to be understood. The wise know the difference. Consider the profound psychological shift that occurs when you truly internalize this principle. Suddenly, the energy you once spent defending your image becomes available for actually developing your character. The time you once devoted to managing others' perceptions can be redirected toward deepening your actual capabilities. The mental bandwidth you once allocated to worry about misunderstanding becomes free for creative thinking and genuine connection. This is where the philosophy transcends tactics and becomes a spiritual practice. To remain misunderstood without suffering, to be criticized without becoming defensive, to be judged without feeling compelled to educate the judges, This requires a kind of inner development that most people never undertake because they're too busy maintaining their external image to develop their internal substance. Machiavelli observed that, since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. But the highest level of influence transcends this binary entirely. It cultivates a presence so authentic and grounded that others feel both safe and inspired in its vicinity, not because it seeks to be loved or feared, but because it has become genuinely trustworthy through its refusal to manipulate for approval. When someone operates from this level of integration, they become dangerous in the most productive sense. Dangerous to false narratives, dangerous to emotional manipulation, dangerous to systems that depend on people's need for external validation. They represent a kind of freedom that others didn't know was possible. The practical implications ripple through every area of life. In family dynamics, when relatives attempt to guilt you into participation in dysfunction, your calm refusal to engage, delivered with love but without explanation, becomes a form of modeling that can shift entire systemic patterns. You're not trying to change them. You're simply refusing to participate in what doesn't serve, and your consistency creates space for healthier interactions to emerge. At work, when colleagues engage in office politics or attempt to draw you into competitive dynamics, your ability to remain focused on actual productivity while staying friendly but uninvolved sends a clear message about where you direct your energy. You become known not for political maneuvering, but for reliable excellence, which ultimately carries more influence than any amount of strategic networking. In romantic relationships, when partners test boundaries through emotional volatility or manipulation, your ability to remain loving, but unmoved by attempts to destabilize your peace creates a foundation of safety that actually enables deeper intimacy. They learn that your love doesn't depend on drama for excitement or chaos for passion. But perhaps the most profound application involves how you relate to criticism itself. When you understand that criticism often reveals more about the critic than the criticized, you can receive it with genuine curiosity rather than defensive reaction. You can ask yourself, what might be true in this feedback, without needing to accept the entire framework or emotional charge behind it. This ability to extract value from criticism while remaining unshaken by the delivery transforms every attack into potential education. Your critics become unwitting teachers, and your capacity to learn from hostility becomes a source of continual growth that others cannot access because they're too busy defending to be developing. The strategic advantage is enormous. While others exhaust themselves in endless justification and emotional reaction, you're accumulating wisdom, developing skills, and building inner resources. While they're managing their image, you're developing your substance. While they're trying to control others' perceptions, you're becoming someone worth perceiving. This is the ultimate paradox. The less you need others to understand you, the more likely they are to see you clearly. The less you require their approval, the more they're inclined to give it. The less you chase influence, the more naturally it flows toward you. But here's where this philosophy demands absolute honesty with yourself. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's not about superiority or dismissiveness. It's about developing such a clear sense of your own values and boundaries that you can engage with others from a place of genuine strength rather than hidden need. The person who has mastered this approach doesn't avoid conflict. They engage with it from a place of centeredness that allows them to remain clear-thinking under pressure. They don't withdraw from relationships. They participate in them without losing themselves. They don't become indifferent to others. They become so secure in themselves that they can afford to be genuinely curious about others without needing to control the outcome of that curiosity. This level of development creates what we might call gravitational presence, a way of being that naturally draws people toward clarity and authenticity because it doesn't demand anything from them while simultaneously offering something valuable. The experience of being around someone who isn't trying to take anything from the interaction. In our hyper-connected age, where everyone is performing their lives for invisible audiences and seeking validation through metrics and reactions, the person who has genuinely transcended this need becomes increasingly rare and therefore increasingly magnetic, not because they're trying to be mysterious or difficult, but because they've become genuinely self-contained in a way that creates space for others to be authentic as well. The techniques we've explored, strategic silence, selective engagement, curious non-defense, are not manipulative tools but expressions of this deeper transformation. They work not because they trick people, but because they represent a more evolved way of engaging with human dynamics that honors both your integrity and others' intelligence. When you no longer need to be right, you become someone others want to learn from. When you no longer need to win, you become someone others want to collaborate with. When you no longer need to be understood, you become someone others want to understand. This is the final revelation. True power isn't about controlling others' responses to you. It's about becoming so internally complete that their responses become irrelevant to your sense of self, which paradoxically makes you more genuinely available for authentic connection when it serves mutual growth. The path forward isn't about becoming untouchable or unreachable. It's about becoming so touchable and reachable by what truly matters that the superficial loses its power to disturb your peace. It's about developing the discernment to distinguish between feedback that serves your growth and noise that serves others' dysfunction. Machiavelli wrote that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. The modern application is this: he who neglects developing his inner foundation while trying to manage his outer image affects his exhaustion rather than his empowerment. The invitation, then, is not to become hard or cold or disconnected, but to become so genuinely warm and connected to what matters that you can afford to be unmoved by what does in it. To develop such clarity about your values that you can engage with others' confusion without becoming confused yourself. To cultivate such security in your worth that you can allow others to misunderstand without feeling diminished. This is the art of being beautifully, powerfully misunderstood. Not because you're trying to confuse others, but because you've become so clear about who you are that you no longer need their clarity to feel complete. And in that completion, you become not a mystery to be solved, but a depth to be appreciated by those capable of appreciation. The rest can continue their surface-level interpretations while you continue your deep-level living. Their understanding was never required for your advancement. Their approval was never necessary for your peace. Their comprehension was never essential for your completion. You were always whole. Now you simply know it, and in knowing it, you've become dangerous to every system that profits from your forgetting. Power doesn't explain. Power is, and you, finally, are.